Worked in the Alberta oil sands for over 15 years. I'm also a student of psychology at the University of Athabasca and 50-50 dad. And what happened to me while working on a 2 week on, 2 week off, 12-hour shifts up in this place, which is Suncor Base Plant, a nice poisonous gas plant, where I ran a lot of the fire equipment safety systems. I was an inspector of maintenance there. So every building I had access to had my own truck, run around here. There's a bunch of more buildings up here, but that place is nuts. You make a wrong turn in the wrong place, there's H2S gas coming out of sewer things. There's just so much shit going on, hazards everywhere. You need to be focused when you're doing stuff, right? Especially being fire equipment specialists, you're basically setting off fire systems. And if anybody walks in while water's coming down or what you're doing, a lot of that stuff is chemical as well. It's a huge incident, right? So while I was working up here, I was hit with what life calls a whole shitstorm of bullshit. Like, life doesn't wait for you to kind of get prepared for this stuff. It kind of just drops it right on your head. So I went through a separation with my soon-to-be fiance that led to a lengthy custody battle and a property dispute. While dealing with that and talking to lawyers on the phone, I had some health issues, went and got checked out at a doctor and found out I had colon cancer. While dealing with that, I came up north for a shift, and my father passed away from respiratory failure suddenly. So, and then on top of all of it, our contract was coming up at the end of the 6-month period, and sure as shit, the guys who offered the service for cheaper got it. So everybody in the company was laid off. So that was a layoff, a health scare, death of a loved one, and a separation. Interestingly enough, as I started going through these kind of things at the beginning of it, I started reading a book by a woman named Gail Sheely called Male Passages, and she was identifying things that can put men and women into midlife crisis, where you start trying to relive these glory days of your youth when everything was a lot better. And the things that set people into these crises, these mental health crises, are death of a loved one, separation from your partner, employment loss, and health scares. And I was like, holy shit, all four, right, in a 6-month period. Like, I'm pretty much ripe for this mental health crisis, right? She said what pulls people out of it is finding a new passion in life and understanding how to manage it. And instead, it becomes super transformative as opposed to something that's super disruptive in your life. And you come out of it stronger. And it was then I started kind of looking for what's going to make me come out of this stronger, right? And I remember talking to a psychologist that when me and my fiance were going through couple psychology, and telling her, look, I'm like just spiraling at night, man. Like, I work in a poisonous gas plant, 12-hour shifts. It's like hard to concentrate when I've been up all night till 3 a.m. staring at a ceiling, wondering what my life is going to look like. Which, she's threatening that I'm not going to have custody of my own son. I don't know what financially I'm going to look like. The big fear that a lot of guys fall into is you're going to become this ATM that's just sending money home to a family you're no longer part of. You're grieving a future that you were expecting to have. And she was like, well, I can give you some drugs to calm you down. And I was like, well, I work at this place, you'd make a wrong trip, you're getting piss tested, and all of a sudden, you're off site, and then you have even more problems. So that wasn't an option for me. And I said, well, what about like a tool? Is there something I can do? Anything I can use? That she had nothing for me. And I was completely disillusioned. At that point, the benefits I had for psychologists had run out, and I'd spent over $4,000 and left with nothing from this psychologist. And now, knowing what I know about modern psychology and what she was doing, she had a method that, if I had kept paying money, it would have helped. But for the average person, it's not really feasible, right? What happened was I ended up finding my own path and finding a method of therapy that's self-therapy called cognitive behavior therapy. And it teaches you a bunch of tools in managing your life in 3 simple directions. And it helped immediately. I was like, this is stuff I can do in my bedroom at night up north. This is stuff I can do while I'm driving up north. This is stuff I can do in the lunchroom. This is stuff I can do on the job site. This is stuff I can do immediately every day to help me manage all this shit that life has thrown at me. And when I started learning it, I started looking around to, a lot of the guys on my crew, and I was like, holy fuck, they need this shit too, right? Like, this is stuff so helpful that if I can teach them some of it, they could really benefit from it. For instance, one day, me and my partner, we were working in the plant, and we finished our work early, closed our permits off, and we had to come up to the tailings pond here and just kind of chilled and watched the sunset. He gets a phone call, and this is like one of the strongest salt of the earth farm boys from Alberta like I've ever met. He's a guy I've seen like wrenches slip in his hand, hit him in the mouth, and he just spits blood out, keeps going. On one turnaround, he was coming up north, or sorry, he was coming back home, and we all got a message from him. Oh yeah, I'm in the hospital. I hit a moose on the way like back. Right? Shows a picture of his car in the ditch. This looks like someone took it and just crumpled it. I'm like, how did a human crawl out of that? Windshield's absolutely fucked. And next picture is just him in the hospital with stitches all the way up and down his arm, and he's smiling. Like, this guy doesn't feel pain. He's not built like a lot of guys are, right? And when he got this phone call, his mother, who had been struggling for 10-year battle with cancer, had passed away suddenly from this cancer. And he just looked at me, and his tears started flowing from his eyes. And he's just like, it was like he was trying to catch them. He was confused. He didn't know what was going on. I said, okay, man, like, we're going to drive you to the trailer. You're going to have to head home and go see your family, right? And he's like, well, why the fuck would I do that? Why am I going to go see my family? Like, I don't want to be sad and poor, right? Like, I'm going to stay up and finish the shift, right? And something kind of went off in my head right there. It's like, there's a huge disconnect between a lot of construction workers and people who work in this industry from their families. Because of us being here, this becomes our family. And we kind of forget that there is a whole attachment to our other family at home. And we feel like the only thing we can do for our family at home is provide financially. There's a disconnect of our emotional network that we have there. He didn't realize at the time that, his young daughter had just lost her grandmother and might want to talk to her dad about it. Or that his brother and sister had lost their, mother as well. And even his father, who had just lost his life partner, might want to, consult with his family and lean on them as a network of people, right? So as I drove him to the lunch trailer, and he was, fussing and fighting, saying, oh, no, I'm going to stay up and work the rest of the shift. It's only 3 days in. I can't miss the work and all this other stuff. We finally get to the lunch trailer, and once he tells them what's kind of happened, the next light that went off in my head was our company refused to let him go back to his work. They're saying, you're not mentally here. You're going to be a hazard to yourself and to others. And like, what are you really going to get done like productively when you're thinking about this? And right there, it really hit as a pivot point for like the next part of my entire career, which is, here's a company literally admitting that mental health takes you out of the game. Right? It takes you out of the game for production. It takes you out of the game for being safe. It makes you a hazard to other people at this extreme level. Meanwhile, while I was dealing with the death of my father and my cancer scare and, all the other stuff I was dealing with divorce, I was, what are you doing? Get back to work. I was having problems that were obviously manifesting, coming into work unfit, getting write-ups for missing shifts. And, even one time a guy wrote me up and he's like, I'm sorry I have to do this. I know what you're going through, but I got to write you up because you fucking missed a shift because you were drunk. And I'm like, yeah, do what you got to do, buddy. Like, this doesn't feel good for anybody, right? Either way, there's a way that they mitigate and try to manage it for grief and other things, but they don't recognize all the other shit. They kind of leave it up to you. And even when they recognize grief, they give you the 2.85 days to, manage your shit. They don't tell you how to do it. They just say, it's up to you, right? Go figure it out. And if you're spending all that time just kind of bed rotting and, doom scrolling and just feeding into that stuff, it doesn't help you whatsoever, right? How do we get better? How do we, mitigate from burnout and all these other things, these long hours and hot days and, life stress is put on us? How do we relax and actually better ourselves and our mental health? So he's one individual. And then, when our company basically said, yeah, like, just drive home and we'll see you next turnaround, right? In 2 weeks. That should be long enough, right? I kept thinking he's about to drive the most dangerous highway in Alberta, from Fort Mac to Edmonton, and all he's going to be thinking about is all this shit in his head. Like, this guy hit a moose just in the summer, and now it's winter, and he's thinking about all this shit. He needs to pay attention to the road even more. How's he going to keep his mind on the road, right? Had I known a lot of the tools that I've written in this book at that time, I could have coached him on some of the stuff that could have kept his mind together and on the road. He didn't get injured or anything, but he made it, and he actually attended some of my courses where I teach these things in full, and he was able to come through it and give me one of the better reviews that I've ever had. So it's proof that you can teach an old dog new tricks, right? The next man I want to talk about, who is a Saskatoon local here, And he's a sprinkler fitter who's worked in the sprinkler fitting industry forever. And he was like the proverbial hothead dude, right? He would come in and he'd tell the foreman where to stick it. He'd tell the operators where to stick it. He'd get you your permit. He'd get you to work. He'd get the guys working, and it would be his way, and everybody knows a guy like this, where it has to be their way or the highway or anything like that. But you go with it because it gets the job done and he's productive, right? This caught up to him one day when we were tasked with doing a hydro test outside of a fab bay in Suncor base plant. And we're like, okay, we got to do this. We got to fill it with glycol and we're going to do this. And he goes, it's fucking November. Why are we doing a hydro test? This is make work for us. This is stupid. People are going to drive by here. They're going to think that we're absolute morons. This is so stupid. It makes our company look shitty. It makes me look like a retard as a fucking, as a trades worker. People are going to just they're going to think we're a joke, man. And as he's talking to me, he starts clutching his chest and he's just like, ugh. And he goes back to the truck, grabs a little inhaler and starts puffing. I'm like, what are you doing, bro? And he's like, well, I'm just taking a shot of nitro. It's all good, man. I just got a little itch in my chest. And I'm like, okay, like everything cool? He's like, you know what? It's not really going away. Maybe you take me to emergency services. So I drive him to the fire hall, which is pretty much right next to us. And they immediately load him into a gurney and throw him into an ambulance and drive him to Fort McMurray Hospital. He had a minor heart attack from just getting so stressed about shit, right? Getting so stressed. And I was thinking the whole time in my head, I'm thinking, they're paying us to do this, man. It's an easy task. It's fucking free money. Who cares what other people think, right? My mentality was totally different. I'm relaxed. I'm happy to be there. He's losing his mind. And knowing something about the tools that I teach now, there was a lot of ways that could have been mitigated just from affecting his thinking and even that reaction that his body had to those thoughts. Those thoughts literally worked him up to the point of giving him a minor heart attack, right? And I looked around and I thought, my crew isn't just like this huge crew of like fuck-ups and misfits and, guys who are having issues. Everybody in the oil sands was going through something. And then everybody in the trades is going through something. It's not just fly in, fly out workers who have a compressed work week. That's kind of just a really, focused look at all of construction, all of the trades. We're expected to work these long hours and these hard hours and, we're told to suck it up at an early age and just kind of deal with a bunch of shit that life throws at us, but we don't know how to deal. Nobody ever gives us those tools. And it's those tools that I found. So as I was searching through and trying to and going into psychology and learning stuff, I fell in love with a lot of research, right? I started trying to find research about mental health in men and mental health in construction workers. And I wondered, has anybody ever done any research on mental health in the oil sands? And it turns out the year before, in 2022, a sociologist from the University of Alberta had done a huge survey on a bunch of people from the oil sands. And it came out with some crazy, crazy information. One of them being that 1 in 7 people in the oil sands reported suicidal thoughts from job stress. And that is a frightening number in its own, right? Like 1 in 7 people, right? There's 14 of us in the room. That means 2 of us have thought about committing suicide. And what I knew about that is 1 in 7 men in the oil sands admitted to a female psychologist that they had suicidal thoughts. Knowing my own barriers that I had with opening up to a psychologist about things and opening up to, even people about what's going on in my life, I'm like, that's 1 in 7 men who are brave enough to admit that shit, right? How many people just didn't admit it, right? And I know that number to be much bigger in my head. So 1 in 7 is still what could be considered an epidemic among a small population of people, right? Construction workers. 1 in 7 in the oil sands, is thinking that's crazy. So, and knowing that it's more, it makes it even more, alarming, right? Some other things that report had was that over 80% of people will show up to work sick or unwell. That's physically unwell, right? If they've got an injury that they're not reporting or some kind of sickness, they're just whatever, I need to go to work. But how many people are showing up to work, mentally unwell or not fully there? This is something that we call presenteeism, where someone is showing up to work with mental stuff going through their head and they're not fully at work. They're kind of somewhere else thinking about other shit. And we've all done it, and especially if we've had a night out or something like that. But, we're giving 10% at work or we're giving 50% at work. And, this becomes an issue because this is where safety incidents happen. This is where what he's talking about, the beginning of the task or the end of the task become even more hard to accomplish safely, because the mind will focus on, okay, this is what I got to do. But the other stuff I've done a million times, right? It's all good. It's super easy. I can become super complacent in it. That's when procedures get skipped or little things just get missed because our mind's being pulled everywhere else. But on an FLHA, when they say complacency, what do you put to mitigate that, right? If it's something's going to fall, okay, I got to put a strap on this truck and make sure that nothing falls off this truck. That's how you mitigate that. Complacency, I mean, I've heard a few different things. One was like a 20-20-20 rule. Every 20 minutes, you look around 20 feet for 20 seconds, just to be aware of your surroundings. That doesn't help when you're thinking about a divorce or when you're thinking about fucking other shit that's not physically there, right? How do you stay focused? And I learned some good tools for it. So that being said, what I've learned was through cognitive behavior therapy, which is a method of like self-help tools that you learn and you can put into your life that really help you focus in these kind of areas and become safety critical, not just at work, but even at home, just help you through it. I started thinking about like why this stuff isn't really taught and why people have a hard time going to therapy. One thing that Sarah Doro had reported as well was that over 65% of people who had access to mental health utilities never would use them, they said, through their work. And I wondered why. Why is that? You have access to it. What's the deal? Is it stigma? Is it guys are too like proud to do it or all these other things? And a life event happened for me where I was, hosting this big event where I was running stuff for a nonprofit I help, which is raises money for mental health awareness and things like that. And I had hired a friend to be a bartender. And when she showed up, she was like, why'd you hire me to be a bartender? Like, I'm literally a city event planner. I could have helped you with this so much more and got so many more people here, helped you with donations. Like, why did you kind of overlook me? And I thought, well, your dad just like passed away from dementia like last week. I didn't want to like throw a bunch of shit on your plate. And then the light went off in my head. This is why people don't talk about mental health at work. Because as soon as somebody knows about like your mental condition, we're fearful that they're going to start treating us different. And almost as humans, even if we're sympathetic like I was towards them, it becomes an act of caring to go, okay, well, I'm not going to give you a huge workload. Maybe take it easy and da-da-da. And that's the last thing anybody wants when they're dealing with something like that. They don't want to be treated different. They want to just work through their stuff. And sometimes they want to even focus on more work. It depends on the person, right? But either way, I realized that was one of the huge barriers for people reporting about mental health issues at work. The other one is, nobody wants to go to a fucking psychologist. Nobody wants to talk to someone with a degree on the wall that's like, hoity-toity and they think is higher than them about shit and be like, these are the problems I have. But what they do like to talk to is their buddies at work, the guys who understand them and all this other stuff. And this is literally how I got vacuumed into like this, mental health position that I'm in now, is because I'm what the psychology world calls a culturally competent counselor. I understand the trades work. I've been a trades worker for like my whole life. I've got more steel-toe boots in my basement than running shoes, right? And it's just one of those things where guys feel more comfortable talking to someone that is in their network, that's around them, that understands the issues they go through and the stresses they have from working long hours, waking up fucking early. Not the big thing that a lot of psychologists miss is guys in the trades and people in the trades don't have time to go to a psychologist. The last thing they want to do on a weekend when they get their time off is go sit in an office and talk about their problems. They want to relax. They want to do their own thing. They're suffering from burnout, right? When you're working a 12 and 12 or whatever, the last thing you want to do when you come home, even if you have those 2 weeks off, is be like, I'm going to start, working on my mental health and doing all this other stuff. It just doesn't compute that way. You want to just lay in bed and relax and just suffer from the burnout, I guess, is what I did. Either way, what I realized is, after teaching some cognitive behavior therapy to a lot of trades workers, they were really benefiting from it. I helped a lot of guys with their anger, and some other people go through other issues in their life, and they were super appreciative. And it's not too hard to learn. So I'm a guy who doesn't like to gatekeep any type of these tools, right? I like to present them and give them as much as possible. My whole philosophy is I'm going to lay all these tools out in front of people. They can take what works for them, what doesn't work for them. Just use it, try it, right? So I'm going to teach you a little bit about cognitive behavior therapy right now, and you're going to leave with a book that literally takes you through it, right? So the first concept is to understand how your thoughts, behaviors, and emotions all affect one another, right? Thoughts can affect your behaviors, what you do, which then can affect your emotions about how you feel. Also, your emotions can affect your thoughts. Your emotions can affect your behaviors. This is good to know because if one is out of sync, we can use the other ones to kind of get it in sync. And there's tools for each, right? I like to call them assessment and adjustment tools. Some of the first tools are just looking at what am I thinking? How am I acting? What do I feel? And other ones are how can I change that? How can I adjust that to benefit me the best, right? And these things, once you start using them, I literally felt like I fucking came out of the matrix. I was like, what the fuck? Like, how had I been living like this for so long? Just allowing myself to go on autopilot and just to be reacting to all this crappy stuff in the world and thinking it's so shitty when I literally had a choice to go, and just change that. And that all starts with thoughts. A big thing to understand about thoughts is we have something that happens called automatic thoughts, which is a reaction to anything that happens in our life, right? Somebody cuts you off in traffic and you think, holy fuck, that guy just tried to kill me. What the fuck? And you're getting so mad. Nobody in Saskatchewan knows how to drive. This is fucking awful. They need to change all this stuff. And they're giving driver's licenses to anybody these days. And all those thoughts become automatic. They're living rent-free in your head. And it's making your day shitty. It's making your whole world shitty. You start painting your world through a lens that all of a sudden everyone's trying to kill you and the government's just handing out, IDs and driver's license to whoever. So what they teach you is a thing called the thought record. So when you have one of these thoughts, you learn to identify the activating event, getting cut off, remove the emotion from it. So instead of someone tried to fucking kill me, cut right in front of me, they were going to cost me millions of dollars and that's the last thing I need. And you start spiraling down and all of a sudden you're thinking about your financial situations and you're going through all this shit. Instead you go, it's not that. So like maybe I was driving and someone moved in front of me and nothing happened. But it was a sudden shock to me. That's taking the emotion out of the activating event. And then you write down your unhelpful thoughts about it. You go, okay, well, that's where all that crazy shit goes. And you start to look at that because it's important too. Those are thoughts that you're going to have, right? They're going to come up. There's no use ignoring them. But we can examine them and go, are they true? Or are they just like, fabrications that are actually just framing my world and making me look through a lens that is not helpful? So you go, this guy tried to kill me. That's your unhelpful thought. Okay, is that true? Well, no, he didn't even see me, right? How did he try to kill somebody he didn't see? He's just kind of careless or he did something by mistake, right? And then you start thinking about it, well, okay, I should be a little more lenient towards drivers here. Maybe I'll drive more defensively. I might have been going a little fast. Then you re-rate your emotions. And what this does, it becomes a tool of going from emotionally elevated, upset, to, okay, I worked through it. I'm less emotionally elevated and I can, maintain. I was doing these up north at lunch, at like my lunch table, running through all the fucking shit through my head of going through a divorce, cancer, what the fuck's going to happen to my, parents' house, all this stuff. And I would write it down and go through these things. And I was able to return to work and do safety critical shit. At the time I was doing this, it was summer. And I was literally in a tank farm, getting into like a man basket, being lifted up by a crane under air, and then going towards the tank farm and inspecting what they call a foam lateral. So these foam devices shoot foam into tanks when they're on fire. They're super safety critical. And to inspect them, once you get above a certain level in a tank farm, you have to be under air because they can't test for H2S in the air that's might be coming off the tank. Super safety critical. I'm signaling a crane while in a man basket that crane guy is putting me in. If I bang against that tank, that's an incident. If I get my fingers clipped because I'm holding the side of it and signaling, that's an incident. If I step on my hose, that's an incident. There's a million fucking things all around this tank. It's not the easiest thing to get into. Hit any one of those, that's an incident. That's a piss test. That's a bunch of shit I don't need while dealing with this stress. So I was able to put my thoughts, in the lunchroom and work through them there and return to work with the kind of attention I needed to do that safety critical shit. The next thing, tool I want to show you is another one for helping. That was kind of an assessment and adjustment tool. These ones are strictly adjustment. And they're very important because just like I said, if I'm getting into that man basket and I'm having an incident where I'm thinking something through and it's just taking me out of the game, I like to use the example of, there's a guy who's about to get into an EWP. And the night before, he's had an argument with his wife, right? And he decides to text her that morning. He's in full fall arrest, and he's just getting out of the truck, ready to go. And he says, you know what? He texts his wife, I'm sorry about the fight last night. let's talk about when I get home. And she just sends him one letter back, just says K. And he just goes, what? Okay, what the fuck does that mean? And he starts thinking, she's still mad at me. Oh my God, I'm going to get a divorce, all this other stuff. He's not going to stop the site and go, hey guys, give me a second. I need to go in the truck and do a thought record, right? There's other things he can do. There's all these things that in my book I show called cognitive distortions. And they're little tricks to really identify automatic thoughts instantly and go, that's not really a logical thought. I might be, being too emotionally involved and invested in this. And with the incidence of the K, a big one is jumping to conclusions, right? He doesn't know what his wife is thinking, right? No time for clarity, but there's no reason to think, shit, immediately go to the worst, right? It's a big thing to understand that a lot of times we fortune tell, which is one of the jumping to conclusions categories, where we're deciding what's going to happen before we even know or have a reasonable explanation of how it's going to happen. Another one is mind reading, right? We just assume what other people are thinking without even asking them. And then we act on it or we feel on it without ever clarifying, right? We just go, I assume that person is thinking this and I'm getting fired because, there was this thing that happened and I'm definitely getting fired. And we're spiraling. We're worried about our financial situation, all these other things when it's, I didn't ask anybody. I didn't clarify. I'm just thinking and running off on my own. These are ways that we can contain a lot of those thoughts that can, stop us from writing angry emails or storming off site and quitting our job or, throwing a wrench across a room and saying, fuck this place, I'm not coming back, right? Everybody's done it, right? And so those are a couple tools that are identified in my book that you can use to help with the thoughts part of it. The behavior tools are so helpful that they helped me get out of a negative drinking cycle that I was literally about to put myself in AA because of it, right? But it was hard for me to see. So what the behavior tool is, they call it an activity record, and you take your day hour by hour, right? When you're in a thing like this and you can't really even see what's making you depressed, you don't know what's up, this becomes a super helpful tool. Hour by hour, you check your day, and then your days, you rate them 1 out of 10. So you can identify the good days and the bad days, right? Instantly, as soon as you start treating your life like a science experiment, you come outside of it and you start automatically treating yourself a lot better. The instant thing, my examples are in there from my activity records. And you'll see I go from eating pizza and waking up 10 minutes before work and rushing out the door and drinking as much coffee as I can to waking up earlier, going to bed earlier so I'm getting more sleep, eating better food. I start eating chicken instead of pizza. I start making smoothies. I start going to the gym, instead of watching TV all night. And you instantly start treating yourself better because you're accountable. Every day, you're accountable for every hour. You have those hours to make your life better, right? You start to feel really empowered by doing this. But what also happens is you can start to notice what's making your days negative. That might feel like they're out of your control. So you'll see in there is my days start to go up. I start to go, okay, by Friday, I'm having a 9-day. I'm working out. I'm hitting steam rooms. I'm stretching before work. I'm feeling like king of the world. Fridays, I'm 11. I'm breaking the scale. This is great. I'm hitting BPs right in the parking lot. And I'm getting, pissed drunk with everybody. Everybody's my friend. I'm buying everybody's drinks, right? And then the next day I skip work. It's a 0 day. The next day I'm hungover still. It's a 2. And I'm like, oh, whatever. And then I'm building my, weeks back up. This happened for months on end. And I couldn't figure out what's going on, man. I'm trying all this stuff and I'm doing all the tools, but nothing's helping. So when I started looking at them all, I'm like, it's constantly spiking and going down. Why can't I maintain this level of happiness in my life? And it became super easy to identify. It's the drinking, right? I'm going out and I'm overdoing it and I'm going nuts. This isn't a lesson to say stop drinking and alcohol is bad or whatever the fuck. What it is to say if it's doing this to your life and you can't maintain a level of happiness that's congruent with, what you want in life, then you might want to make a change. And the change was way easier when it was identified in front of me in a literal data set where I could go, okay, well, that's the problem. And the next step, which is the adjustment part of behaviors, is so easy. I think it's why people constantly miss it. I've got 5 pages dedicated to it in this book. And it's as simple as taking out whatever is making your life shitty and putting something better in. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what would be better than going to the pub and drinking with all my brothers for a long time, right? That was my happy place. But there's 5 pages in here full of just better stuff to do. and they're full on lists. So, I recommend if you're having one of those issues, just to try some of this stuff just for fun. See what you might learn about yourself, what you learn that you like. I learned a ton of stuff about myself just by removing that one negative thing and being forced to come out of my shell and do other shit, right? And they can be things like just going for walks or going for hikes or whatever the heck, right? You start to engage in those other parts of your life, and you're not wasting your life at the bar, which can be expensive and, kill a lot of the happy chemicals that are automatically being made in your mind. So the next one is emotions. And they like to say, name it to tame it is kind of the phrase they use in here. Is you need to understand your emotions in order to tame them. And this is best demonstrated by, after I released this book, a friend of mine bought a bunch. She saw that I had it on Facebook and it's on Amazon. So she bought a bunch off Amazon, and she messaged me and she goes, I'm a psychologist who actually uses your book for a lot of guys who come and see me, right? And I just want you to know that your book really helped me today. I had a guy who came in a couple of weeks ago, and he would always, he'd show me his phone and he'd go, this is how I feel. I'm going through it, but this is how I feel. And he'd put up Spotify and he'd show her a Linkin Park song. He's like, you ever heard Bleed? That's how I feel, right? And she'd be like, well, what is that expressing? He goes, well, I pay you. You tell me what it says, right? What does that say about me? And she's going, well, these are your emotions. You need to tell me what you feel, right? And he couldn't for the life of him identify what emotions he was feeling. And it is quite hard sometimes. That's why there's tools for it. The tool in here is called an emotions wheel. And what it does is it shows you all these subtle emotions that are very nuanced. Things like indifferent and helpless and numb and fragile, isolated, and even successful, joyful, and shows how they go into bolder emotions and even more broad emotions that eventually end up in things just like happy, surprised, angry, fearful, and upset, like sadness, right? So you understand how these really subtle emotions that might connect with you on this level lead to these broader emotions. You go, that's what it means, right? Something that was interesting to me is something like jealousy can lead into fear as well as into anger, right? Because we're fearful that we might not have as much as somebody else or have a life that we're, idolizing. But once we name it, it comes time to tame it, right? She had messaged me and basically said after he used this, he was able to, name his emotions, and we could work through some of those and go, okay, well, like now we know your emotions, we can work on that. And the things that cognitive behavior therapy teaches is an awesome way of understanding your emotional reaction to things. Why do we get so emotional that we do that crazy thing and throw that wrench across the room, or we yell at somebody that we actually care about and don't mean it? What is pushing us over that edge to make that reaction that we feel out of control? And what it is, it's an old system left over from evolutionary, like our evolution as a species, right? All of our ancestors existed for a very long time before us in way harsher conditions, where an emotional reaction meant you needed to survive, right? This is your ancestors in the woods, and when they hear something thumping around there, if they didn't perk up their ears and pay attention to what was going on, that could mean life or death. And what happened was the people who did not pay attention, they all died because the bear got them or something ate them, and they had no survival instincts. So literally through genetics, we are left over with the survival instinct that makes us hyper alert when we become emotional, right? And this is known as your sympathetic nervous system or your fight or flight response. But it's really fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. When our ancestors saw that bear in the woods, the instant reaction was either fight it, okay, that guy didn't probably survive very well, or freeze, they just stand still, a little bit of a better chance. Flight, which is run, and that guy probably didn't last as long either. Or fawn, which is, you lay down on the ground and you curl up into a ball, and some people say that works. But at Suncor, they just gave us a bunch of bear spray, and they told us later that they wanted it back because people were bear spraying each other. But, real mature dudes out there, right? And, so this reaction that happens, it's what makes us write that angry email. It's what makes us fucking scream at our friends or our wives. That anger, that's that fight reaction, right? I feel threatened, I'm fighting, right? I feel threatened, I'm leaving the room. I'm just giving up, right? That's the flight or even fawn or freeze, right? I feel threatened, I'm just sitting here, I don't have a reaction. So how do we handle this reaction if it's automatically in us? There's body hacks that people have known for centuries that are just like coming out through what's called somatic quieting techniques. And one of them is used in military exercises and for first responders in order for them to help them do the safety critical shit they need to do to save lives and keep themselves safe. So before a fireman runs into a burning building, he does these exercises so that he doesn't freeze at the door. So his body just doesn't freeze up on him and say, you ain't going in there. That's not going to make you survive. I'm stopping you so that you survive, right? It's the same feeling you get if you're standing next to something that is, up too high. Your body's going, nope, nope. You feel that weird uncomfortableness because your body's going, that's not good for us to survive, right? Military guys feel it too when they're going into exercises and they know there's live rounds happening or what's going on, right? They're freezing up. They're going, this, and they can use this exercise that I'm going to teach you today about how to manage themselves emotionally. It's called box breathing. And I really need to do it now because I'm fucking up here talking to you guys and swinging my arms around, drank a lot of coffee. It's going to help me relax, right? And it works in a couple different ways, but one is super important to know. And it's what we know about the working mind, right? When we have a thought or when we have something that we're like thinking about, as far as like psychology and our model of the mind right now can tell, is we have basically a workbench in our mind where we're putting that. And we can go into our memory and retrieve things just like inventory and put them on that workbench. The problem happens when we have a thought that's just so big and it's heating up our workbench. It's like someone just put their lunch on your workbench, a big hot